Welcome to 30-Minute Reviews. I am Adam. So, let's talk about something a little bit more serious than we usually talk about on this show. That would be the death of AMC. AMC theaters, as you probably know if you listen to this podcast, because I use AMC a lot. AMC is my go-to theater. We have a few theaters in the area. We actually have one of each of the three major theater chains by where I live. We have a Regal, we have an AMC, and we have a Cinemark. And each of them has their own pros and cons. The AMC has an IMAX screen, a Dolby screen, and it has AMC A-List. But the theater's facilities, if you go to see a movie that's not in one of the two premium formats, are a little bit lacking. I saw Toy Story 4 at the AMC last year on opening night, and this is not a joke. This actually happened. There was a glitch in the system, and the computer that was running the projector crashed, and it turned out the computer was running on Windows 95. The theater's not exactly cleanest. It's and sometimes the service is a little slow, and I don't get reception there. The Regal is the cleanest theater I've ever been in, and it's got reclining seats. It's very comfortable, but it doesn't have any premium format screens, and it only has 9 screens total. It doesn't have a large variety of non-major releases. So, like when the Avengers comes out, not only can you not see the movie in a premium format, you might be able to see it in 3D, but you won't be able to see it in IMAX or RPX or anything like that. The theaters are small, and they only have 9 screens, so like 3 of them will be showing Black Widow or something come November. And the Cinemark theater has RPX, and it's got not RPX, it's got 4DX and all these premium screens that are like the top of the line stuff. But the issue is the program that they have with it that's like AMC A-List is not the best, and on top of it, the area isn't exactly the nicest. So you run the risk of having your car broken into while you are seeing a movie. So there's a lot of, and that's not that's an actual thing where that parking lot is known for cars getting broken into. So that's just a thing. That's just the way it is. So I go with the AMC because the A-List is the best bang for the buck. And it's got the best variety of screens. So the AMC is kind of like this one is just right in so much as it's not the worst option, but it's also kind of got a little bit of everything you need. So AMC is the theater chain that's really feeling the hurt from the coronavirus shutdowns because we don't have movies that are coming out. So people aren't going to the movies, and the theater operates in a sense where they only make money when people come into the theater, obviously, as most businesses do. So if the government mandates the theaters can't open, they can't make money. And then, by extension, the studios have already put the money into the movie. They're not putting movies out because why are they going to put the movie out some places but not everywhere? They'd rather just do a blanket everywhere release, especially for movies that are big on, the group experience of the theater and with spoilers. So, like, all of Marvel Studios' release dates got pushed back. Wonder Woman got pushed back. Every movie coming out, with the exception of Tenet, has been pushed back. And Tenet is staying where it is because people are anticipating, the studios are anticipating that the theaters will be back open and operational in July, which I don't think is accurate considering doctors are saying that at this point we're going to be continuing social distancing for a long time. We won't be able to have sporting events with an audience, with fans in the stands until 2021. So I don't think movie theaters are going to be able to open even by November. I think that's wishful thinking, but I can't guarantee that's going to happen. So AMC is really bleeding money at this point, in a way that Regal isn't quite audibly hurting. AMC is taking it bad. So what is the issue here? If I'm a theater chain, I think it's time for us to look at the situation and really reevaluate the business model around the theater chain in regard to the distributor. And what do I mean by that? Movie theater chains in a very unique way, are kind of beholden to the distributor continuing to put out quality product, to drive people in. Because here's the thing: when you buy a movie ticket for, I'm in New York, so we're going to use the New York rate. So $18.50 is about the price you would pay if you wanted to see opening night. When I saw Avengers Endgame, had I not had AMC A-List, I would have been paying about $20 to get into the theater to see the movie. And I saw it in IMAX. So $18.50, we'll use that. The theater doesn't see that $18.50. Most of that money goes back to the distributor, in this case, Walt Disney, the Walt Disney Company. Or Buena Vista, I think is the formal name of the distributor, the subsidiary distributor at Disney who does the actual distribution of the movie. So the money goes back to the distributor, who then sends it back to the studio, so that Marvel Studios sees the money. Here is where that issue is. That's why when you go into a movie theater and they give you a cup of a large soda for $7, you're like, oh, that seems a little intense. Yeah, because that's how they're making their money. And because soda is so cheap to bring in and popcorn is so cheap to bring in and make, they can increase the price because they have you. And they have you set. So like when I saw Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, the first one, I did not see Crimes of Grindelwald in theater. But when I saw the original, the first one, there was a party going on in the theater. And this wasn't a party sanctioned by AMC. This was a party that people came in with a bunch of kids, and they didn't rent the theater out. They just bought a bunch of seats, and they brought in snacks from outside. And the way you knew that is that they had these Snapple bottles that they don't sell in the theater. And all these kids are loudly eating and drinking food that they brought in from outside places. And that really bothered me, because you want to go to the theater, you want to get the theater experience, but then you're doing this. It's not piracy because you're paying for the movie, but in a sense, you're harming the theater, because the theater does have an avenue for you to rent out the theater for a birthday party. They'll give you cake, they'll give you ice cream, and they have all this cool stuff. And there is a way to do that in a way that benefits the theater, and the theater makes money. You're using the theater in the way you would use a park in this case. And a public park is just that, public. Your taxpayer dollars are paying for it. Your taxpayer dollars are not paying for the movie theater. So when you bring in snacks from outside, you're actively hurting the theater. You're actively hurting that teenager whose job it is to check you on the way through and make sure you don't have anything. The person who's taking the tickets, the person who's recommending you the movie, the person who's pouring the popcorn. All of these things are being actively harmed. And when you do that, you end up in this situation where why is it that now people aren't, these chains can't afford to keep paying people as the theaters are closed? And why is it now that we're looking at AMC on the verge of bankruptcy? Their stock share is down for $2 a share. You can go to your financial analyst. You can, for the price of a movie ticket, buy a controlling stake in the company. And we have this situation happens because of how poor the deal is between the distributors and the chains, and how we've just been okay with it. And what needs to happen now is the chains need to re-leverage the deal. The chains need to come in and say, we need to look at this deal, and we need to say, we're not making enough money on this. You're making $1 billion. You're making $2 billion on this movie. Let's look at Endgame. Endgame is now the top grossing movie of all time. How did that happen last year, and now let's go under? It's very similar to how one of the other top grossing movies of last year, The Lion King, that studio that did The Lion King also did, the visual effects studio did that, also did the visual effects for Detective Pikachu, also did the visual effects for Sonic the Hedgehog, also did visual effects for a few other movies that came out last year. That studio went under. Why? Because they signed these terrible deals with the studios. Because at the end of the day, without a studio to back them, they don't have a job. So the studio has their balls in a vice, for lack of a better word. Here's what needs to happen. I think that I came up with a solution that Regal or Cinemark should really be looking into. There's another major movie company that's publicly traded that has had a little bit of a downturn. Now, it hasn't been it's been a substantial downturn. It is what's it called? It is IMAX, IMAX Corporation, which produces the IMAX cameras, and their branding is all over every movie theater. I think if I'm Cinemark or Cineworld or if I'm Regal, if we can find a way to liquefy our assets enough to be able to do a full acquisition of IMAX, that would be a smart thing to do. Because let's look at IMAX's situation. IMAX's stock share, as of right now, at 12:15 p.m. on April 23rd, when I'm recording this, IMAX's stock price is down at around $11 and change a share. About a year ago, it was about $25 a share. It's had a substantial downturn as a result of this because companies don't need movie cameras because they're not doing productions right now because they can't because there is a global pandemic. So there is, what's it called? There is no shortage of, what am I looking for? There is, what was that? I completely lost my train of thought. Okay, so IMAX. So if we're going to, look at IMAX in this regard, it's at $11 a share. That's not terrible, but it's actually a pretty good price to try and pick it up at. If I'm one of the studios, if I'm Disney, if I'm Viacom, if I'm Comcast, if I'm Warner Brothers, I would be seriously looking at the possibility of buying up IMAX because IMAX has a deep well of technology. And if there's any company I think that would be most likely to pick up IMAX at this point, I think it's Disney. Because Disney has always been a technology company that made movies and used new technology to the best of their ability. So acquiring IMAX and running IMAX would be a big gain for them. But in the event that one of the exhibitor companies, the theater chains, were to buy up IMAX, that would completely re-leverage the deal between the exhibitor and the distributor. So I think if I'm Regal, I'm exploring that possibility. I'm trying to think, how can we re-leverage this deal? Because both sides kind of need each other. And now that we have Trolls World Tour going out on digital, and we have Scoob, the Scooby-Doo movie, coming out on digital in a little under a month, skipping theaters. And these are substantial investment movies. These were meant to be theatrical releases, and they're seeing we can make back our profit and bypass the theaters. It's time to really reevaluate the relationship with the theaters. So what's going to end up happening is smaller releases that you can do for smaller amounts of money will get expanded marketing budgets and do mostly online marketing and mostly televised marketing and things like that, and then have it available on digital, have it go to Netflix. Look how much money Netflix is making right now. The entire relationship has been thrown on its head by this. And it's going to be disastrous for movie theaters. Just yesterday, an article came out saying that Warner Brothers as a whole was reevaluating the theater model. Think about that. This has been the way we've consumed movies since movies started in the silent era. We have been viewing movies in theaters. It's this community aspect of it. It's the fact that everyone in that theater for that 2 hours is here because they have something in common, and that thing in common is that they want to see this thing that thousands of people poured their time and energy into to make and they want to see it happen. And now Warner Brothers is considering pulling out of that completely because they've seen, well, we don't need to do that anymore. We can do this on, we can do this without the theater. We don't need the theater to make the money anymore. And this isn't the only industry where this is happening. DC Comics is now found a new distributor because Diamond Comics wants to deal directly with comic book stores. And I've been saying for years that I think the local comic book store model is archaic in a way. And it's kind of an institutionalized gatekeeping to keep people from getting into comics. Now, I think at the end of the day, Diamond doesn't give a shit if that's the way it is. They don't care how the stores are run because, as long as people are buying comics from Diamond doesn't care. That's not Diamond's problem. But if I'm Marvel or DC or if I'm Image or if I'm TKO or if I'm any number of other comic book companies, I'm like, we probably want to expand our horizons a little bit. So right now what's happening is we're in this weird thing where we have comics that are done and ready to ship to stores. Or we can't really do that right now because of the pandemic, but they can be put out on digital. They're done, they're ready, they're all set. but it's just not happening. So they're not releasing them on the app. Why? Because of Diamond. Diamond is an appendix. It's the tonsils. It's a vesicle structure to the industry that doesn't need to be there, yet still manages to leach out money. It's kind of like how if we simplify the tax code, and every few years this comes up where it's like, well, why don't we just have mail-in? Why don't we just like do it like a simple form? Just mail it in and you're done with your taxes. That's all you got to do. And there's no guessing game. There's no deduction. There's no weird thing you have to do. You have to consult with H&R Block. You have to consult with TurboTax to make sure you're doing your taxes properly. And it's because TurboTax and H&R Block pay a lot of money to the government to keep them from passing that, so that way that exists. And it's the same thing with Diamond. Now, DC has thrown this on its head. It now is distributing comics independently of Diamond. It's got 2 new distribution companies. Marvel hasn't done that yet. And here is the weird situation with this. I think that wishing hundreds and hundreds of small businesses to go out of business is not a good thing. I don't like saying Diamond has to go, because there are people who work for Diamond. There's a human cost to saying that a business has to go and that a business has to go out of business, because there are people who are going to be unemployed as a result of that, and I get that. Diamond needs to rethink its strategy. And I'm saying Diamond specifically because both Marvel and DC can put their faith in Diamond, and if they did it properly, that would be fine. Here's a question I have for anyone who may be listening to this podcast who tends to align more to the right. People who tend to align more with the fandom menace, with Comicsgate, with these groups that say they're not hate groups, but the other side says they're hate groups. What would be lost from selling comics in grocery stores? Reinstituting the spinner rack in a grocery store that's got comics on it. What would be lost by letting comics be sold in bookstores, Barnes & Noble, small local bookstores that are not specifically for comics? What would be lost? What would be the downside of that happening? And I know what they're going to say. They're going to say, well, people wouldn't have to go to the local comic book store anymore, and they can just go there and get it while they're doing other shopping. And that's a valid point, because the local comic book store is kind of a thing that needed to exist more in the past than it does now. And even so, it didn't really need to exist at any point. But the local comic book store, I listened to a podcast with Penn Jillette and Kevin Smith talking about how Penn Jillette's daughter is more into magic than his son is. And how historically you never really saw women magicians. You never saw women illusionists or anything like that, like he is. And he explained why that was. And it was these secrets that he knew, these trade secrets, were passed down in clubs. And in these secret societies that were dominated by men. And if you were a woman, you wanted to get into it, you had to, go in there and try to get yourself to be accepted in that circle. And the local comic book store is kind of the same thing today. Where the local comic book store is, you need to go in, and I'm a guy. I've never gone into a local comic book store and had my fandom challenged. I've seen it happen to women, though. And if I gotta sit here and I gotta go in and I gotta be like, okay, well, have you been reading it this long? Well, no, I'm trying to pick it up and start something new. And then you get mocked and all of that. That is gatekeeping that Diamond doesn't, endorse, but it's not doing anything to stop either. And if we want comics to continue as a medium, what we need to do is we need to expand the audience. No industry, no media form has ever been, has never lasted a long time by honing in on one small subset of the audience and continuing to only hone in on that one small subset. Because if you think about it, it's like, think about like Star Wars, and this is an outcry that happened yesterday. They announced yesterday that there was a new female-centered Star Wars series coming to Disney Plus, being created by the creator of Russian Doll, whose name I'm forgetting right now, but I haven't watched that show either. I should probably watch that. So she's creating the show, and it gets announced it's a female-centric show. Why was it announced that it was female-centric? Is it because every name in Star Wars is very androgynous if you are not familiar with any of the characters? Like, if I told you, guess the gender of Obi-Wan Kenobi, of Qui-Gon Jinn, of Anakin Skywalker, the only one you can really look at are a few characters from the original trilogy are the only ones you can look at and say, okay, that's probably a guy. Or that's probably a girl. Like Leia Organa is probably a girl. Luke Skywalker is probably a guy. Han Solo, probably a guy. When you get to the original trilogy, when you get to the High Republic, when you get to all these other eras, and you start using people who aren't very earthly names, it's harder to do. Like, Lando Calrissian, you can assume is a guy because his name ends in O, it ends masculinely. You can kind of assume he's a guy. But again, not 100% committal because it wasn't really a name until that movie had it. But it's like, when you look at these characters who were around in the prequels, especially, the names are very, androgynous in a sense. So saying it's a female-led show is no different from saying we're making a show about Obi-Wan Kenobi, where we can say we're making a show about Obi-Wan Kenobi, and it's about a guy because we know who Obi-Wan is. We're making a show about Captain Cassian Andor. Again, you can't tell by his name if he's a man or a woman, but because we know who he is from Rogue One, we can assume that's about another guy. And that's the other thing is there was an outcry yesterday about this because it's like there's a female-centric show, they're shoving the politics down our throat. And it's like, no. It's because if they said we're making a show about and they give her a name, and it's like, okay, who is that? That's, the thing. And I think that if they said we're making a show about Dr. Aphra, it would have been met with the same response. If they didn't say it was female-centric, they said we're making a show about Dr. Aphra, a similar thing would have happened. And the reason is, they don't want... I saw someone make this point on Twitter. I think it was on a comment from the Lords of the Sith podcast post. They said, we don't want female fans of Star Wars. All the guys say, we want women to watch it. We don't want women to watch it. We want the women who say we're not like other women to watch it. The women who are like, I'm not like those other girls. Like the girls who become the face of the fandom menace, the female contingency of the fandom menace, those are the girls we want to watch it. Not the people who want, other aspects of the story. And if you look at what's evolved out of the discourse from Star Wars, which we'll talk about more later in the show. We'll talk more about Star Wars. Like I have something to talk about because it was about a tweet that I saw earlier, again, from Lord of the Sith podcast, that I wanted to address, and it was about the, people out of the gate not liking this. And we'll talk about that after we talk about Footlight Parade. But if we look at what this is, it's intentionally designed to keep people from, trying to, watch the... And you know what? This is the weirdest tangent I've ever been on. We've gotten so far off from where we were talking about AMC going under and AMC buying... and Regal possibly buying IMAX. But it all kind of flows a little bit, so we're good. So I think that the point I'm trying to make is that if... The bigger picture that needs to be looked at is we need to reevaluate the relationships that we kind of take for granted, and we kind of assume exist in a way that, and not literally assume exist, but the way they've always worked does not work anymore, and we've seen that now, and it needs to be rethought in a way that's beneficial to both sides and symbiotic. So we'll wrap up with that. Which brings us to this week's movie review. Let's discuss Footlight Parade. Really, there's only really one thing I want to talk about this, because, it's a well-acted movie, it's pre-code, so there's, some weird, there are things that, when you watch the movie, you're going to be like, oh, that doesn't seem like something that you would think would happen in a movie from 1933, but it was before the MPAA was really established, in a way to kind of curtail adult references and violence and all of that. What I wanted to talk about is I want to talk about actors falling into roles that you don't traditionally think of them in. It's something that we really don't see too much today because we don't really have the archetype of the big movie star. We don't have we have like the Pacinos, the Joe Pesci's, but these are people who are from an older era where it's like, we saw them in one type of movie and then we didn't really see them in anything else. And when we think about James Cagney as an actor, we think of him as, playing mobsters. We think of the Roaring Twenties, White Heat. Roaring Twenties, by the way, if there's a movie that should be rebooted, remade, with a with a modern twist, that movie, oh my god, that would be a Best Picture nominee with the right cast and the right director. That'd be a Best Picture nominee right away. It's such a beautiful, it's a great story that would translate very well to the modern world. Especially in a post-Iraq world, I mean, we're not post-Iraq, but in a world where Iraq happened, and we have, and drug dealing is something that we think about a lot. I would love to see that story told. And I think really the reason why we don't have this today is because we don't really have action movie archetype stars. I mean, we have Jason Statham, we have The Rock, and I think that if we saw The Rock or Jason Statham in maybe the closest thing to this would be probably Hugh Jackman in the Greatest Showman would probably be the closest thing to this, where we have Cagney, who's known for his tough guy mobster roles, going into he dances, and really that's what he was trained for. He was a stage star before he made the jump into movies, and he was known for being a stage actor, and at that time that was what was popular, and we don't really have that right now. And that was really the point why I said let's talk about this movie, not the yellow face that we have at the end of the movie, not and it's like the sheer spectacle of the movie. So really that's all I wanted to address is that, and then the whole spectacle of the third act, when we finally get to see the show come together. Very minimal. There's no computer generated effects. It's all created by people, and I think that probably the most impressive is on the waterfall, visually, because it's so unique in how it looks, and that's really all I wanted to address with this movie. It's really all I really had. I wanted to use this as an opportunity to kind of pitch people on a movie they probably haven't seen before. That's old and it's good. So if you have not seen, what's it called? Footlight Parade. You can check it out. It's on DVD now. I think TCM is highlighting it, so you can check it out on their website. There is one scene at the end though that is very racist. One of the dance, one of the routines they do, has a woman a bunch of people playing Asian characters with over-the-top makeup. Not quite over-the-top makeup certain other characters have done, but it's there. You can't really deny that it's there. So let's talk about the last thing I wanted to address, and it's this weird revisionist history about Star Wars. And let me start out with a little bit of an anecdote. When I was in third grade, this kid was a year older than me. I was on the school bus, and Attack of the Clones had just come out, and people were talking about it because we were the target audience for the prequels at the time. It's part of what caused my intense fandom into Star Wars. So here we are on the bus, on our way home from school, talking about Star Wars, and there's one kid. I'm gonna omit his name. He didn't care for something that happened in Attack of the Clones, and if you've watched Attack of the Clones, you're gonna know what I'm talking about. Jango Fett's there. Jango Fett, has a cool scene where he fights Obi-Wan. Then Obi-Wan puts the tracker tracks through hyperspace, goes to, goes to Geonosis, and Jango Fett doesn't put much of a fight, much like his son in Return of the Jedi. He gets his head cut off, and that's the end of that. So we're talking about, the way third graders talk about Star Wars, third and fourth graders. It's like, oh, the lightsabers look cool, and this looks cool, and it's like, it was like the pinnacle of CGI movies at the time was Attack of the Clones, and how awesome the movie looked with the holograms and the spaceships, and oh my god, it was amazing. And we're talking about it, and this kid starts going into a rage about how no one should like Mace Windu because he used a certain expletive for gay people, who weighs around a purple dildo, and of course he's being in fourth grade, us being in third. Joke went over a lot of our heads at the time, and he killed Jango Fett. So this kid goes into a rage, punched someone over it, and it was just a thing. Why do I tell this story? Because I'm convinced that this kid would have grown up to be in the Phantom Menace. Now, for those of you who don't know what the Phantom Menace is, good for you. The Phantom Menace is a subset of the Star Wars fan community on the internet that has really always existed. It's kind of the dissenting opinion of the Star Wars fandom. And what it is, it's kind of this subsection that is against female characters. And we're going to dissect some of their claims today. If we look at, one of the most common things they say is, we like Princess Leia. We like Princess Leia. If we didn't like women, why would we like Princess Leia? We like well-written women, not, poorly written women. And I would agree with them. I will concede they do like Princess Leia. Here's the thing about Princess Leia. If a Star Wars movie came out today and Princess Leia was written exactly the way she was then, word for word, exactly as it was, that character would be hated by this community. And then even the sequel, Empire Strikes Back would be considered promoting cultural Marxist propaganda because they have Lando, and Leia expresses interest for Lando, and then we come back in Return of the Jedi, and we have her, and we have her in a bikini for some of the movie, and she largely doesn't do too much in the movie. Her role is reduced. And that's, that's why, they like her, is that she has one moment early on where she really takes charge, and then she's kind of passive for all the rest of it. When they're taking control of the situation on the Death Star, when they're trying to leave the Death Star, she has she's basically just a damsel in distress for a good amount of that scene. She gets one scene where she kind of leads the escape, and then after that she's just kind of there. She's got a very minimal role. If there was another female in the movie, then she'd probably be relegated to, she'd be considered a supporting actress. She's got such a small, reduced role in the movie. She's only the lead because of, that. Then we get to, she's got a major role in Empire Strikes Back, and, again, not really calling the shots, kind of just passive. She kind of defers to Han the entire time. And then we get to Return of the Jedi. Again, she's deferring to the men. And it's the same thing with Alita. Let's look at Alita battling. People love Alita. Why do they love Alita? Alita came out at the same time as Captain Marvel, and Captain Marvel is a movie about women taking agency themselves and not having to prove anything to anyone but themselves. You aren't beholden to anyone else. That's the message of Captain Marvel. And Alita is a movie with a strong female lead, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, she's still beholden to the men in her life. She's still beholden to the need to, a man needs to give her the upgrade. She can't achieve her best version of herself. She can't get that massive power increase without a man approving it. And I think that's the big difference between Alita and Captain Marvel. And so when we say that these people would love this character now, it's not true. And the other thing that the Phantom Menace is, the Phantom Menace has always been the people who take it way too seriously. It's a movie about wizards in space. And if you think about it, these are the same people who, when Return of the Jedi came out, were like, oh, the Ewoks have made it too childish, and then hated the Phantom Menace in the prequels, and then Ahsoka came out. And if that's the thing that bothers me too, is that it's very revisionist history, and they kind of control the narrative in that regard. Is that, oh, well, we like Ahsoka. You like Ahsoka now. When Ahsoka came out, you hated Ahsoka. I remember this distinctly because Ahsoka came out, and everyone was like, oh, and Anakin had this very powerful apprentice who was a girl, and it was hated at release. And the only continuity in Star Wars is that the fans are going to hate the new thing and retroactively love the old thing. So when that happened, and another thing that had a lot of outcry was there was a novelization of Return of the Jedi that came out after the Clone Wars movie and the Clone Wars TV show began. And in that novelization, they reference Ahsoka. Ahsoka is referenced when he's having that moment, when he's turning from the dark side back to the light, when he's having his final redemption, Anakin, he remembers, he sees Luke, he sees Padme, he sees Obi-Wan, he sees all this stuff. He remembers Ahsoka, too, in that scene. And how he failed her. And how disappointed she would be. And how distraught she would be at her former master taking this turn. And that was, oh my God, you would have thought that, like, they desecrated a grave somewhere. They went back and destroyed the movie. It ruins everything having Ahsoka mentioned there. Oh my God, and that's the thing. Now we get to the Disney acquisition in 2014. People were concerned about, Disney acquired Disney-fied Star Wars when we do episode 7, 8, and 9. And what I didn't realize at the time is that when they say something Disney-fied, they mean diverse. That's what they mean by Disney-fying it. They Disney-fied Marvel. They wanted to, mix with everything. So when we see this happening, when we see what's what I'm looking for? When we see this kind of shift, we see it start out where it's like, we don't like this. We don't like that Disney's making these movies. Then the movies get announced, and it's like, okay, well, we don't like the casting. Then the movie comes out, and it's like, well, I've seen this movie before. This is just A New Hope over again, which is a very valid criticism of The Force Awakens. Rogue One kind of didn't have too many complaints. I'll give them that. There weren't too many complaints about Rogue One. And the reason is Jyn isn't an active player in her own story. She's kind of shuttled around the story, and everything kind of happens around her. So because she's kind of a passive member of the story, everyone else around her kind of has the agency that she's lacking. So that's why that movie doesn't really have any vitriol towards it. Then The Last Jedi comes out, and The Last Jedi was met with the reaction as if not just you desecrated someone's grave and you shit on the grave, but you dug the person up, brought them back to life, killed them again, then shit on the corpse and put it back in the ground. That's what they reacted like in regards to that. They ruined Luke's story. I don't think they ruined Luke's story in any meaningful way. And let me tell you why. Because I think if there's one thing that's continuous with the Jedi, it's that if they have one minor failure, their first response is to go into exile for any length of time. Because that's what happened. Because really, there was no reason for Yoda to give up when he did during the fight against, during the fight against Sidious in Episode 3, but he does. And then Obi-Wan kind of just lets Anakin live and leaves him for dead instead of doing the humane thing and beheading him, or kicking him into the lava, which they, there were so many better ways to handle what happened to Anakin for Obi-Wan that just leaving him for dead was kind of inhumane. And And I hope that's something that haunts him in the show. I'm being completely honest. I hope that decision haunts him, that he could have done that and that would have solved that. But like there would I don't know. There was a better way to handle it than just he's gonna go and sit and watch Luke for decades. And so really that doesn't bother me. And it's like I feel like narratively it makes no sense. If you look at some of the reviews, like if you go to some of these websites that talk about the movie, and before, what happened is you have to look at the reviews that came out immediately after the movie was released. Before, they could kind of get this unified front where they had one person who came up with a good idea, and they all kind of rally behind that. And really, you can see that happen. There's always going to be one person on the forefront who's going to have his idea and have an analysis on the movie, and everyone else will be like, I like that. Then they're going to jump on it too and be like, this is what I think of the movie, and they're all going to jump on the same thing and kind of, churn the same pot, if you will. And if you look at reviews, I think the example I'm going to use is the one from Cosmic Book News. That asshole over there. He discusses the movie, and he says he gave it a glowing review, except for the narrative section. And really, his reviews are just like there's a bit on The Office where Erin talks about rating Holly, and it's like her ears are a 4 and a 7, and she does the thing. It's like she's like a 15 out of a perfect 40, and it's like it really is that's the way he broke it down. Is it's like the sound mixing of this, and it's meant to make him sound more professional than he actually is, or like make it sound like he knows what he's doing when he really doesn't. But it doesn't like it doesn't translate well. So he's talking about like the movie. It's like visually it's amazing. It's like this is great, this is great, this is great, this is great, and then it's like narratively hated what they did with Luke. And that's where the points came off, and that's where where that happened. But everything that happens in the movie, it's like the movie's technically great, and it's like all of a sudden it's like then it shifted. Then they started nitpicking, and then they watched the movie multiple times, and then the nitpicking begins, and they're able to look in and say, "Here's what we don't like. We gotta take this down." Then came the criticisms of Canto Bight. Then came the criticisms of Admiral Holdo. Then came the criticisms of all of that stuff started coming in after the fact, substantially after the fact. What was the other thing? And then came Solo, which came right after, which was the Phantom Menace's first chance they could really claim victory on it. They were able to claim that they had done it. They had taken down Star Wars, the thing they loved for decades. They took it down because Solo underperformed, completely disregarding the fact that Solo had Solo had no interest at any point in production, and only negative press, with the sole exception of the casting of Donald Glover as Lando. It was a fine movie. I actually think it's a more watchable movie than Rogue One. Because Rogue One, you gotta slog through a lot to get to the Battle of Scarif, but for for Solo, the entire thing's kind of just fun to watch. It's a much better movie, and I think that's I don't know. I feel like that was a misfire to keep that coming out just 6 months after The Last Jedi. It was right after Infinity War, after John Wick, before Deadpool. It's Deadpool 2. It was just a poor time frame for that movie to come out in the middle of the summer. Had to move it to August, it may have done better. Had to move it to December. I think December of 2018 was a little bit packed, though, if I remember correctly. Because Aquaman and Into the Spider-Verse and Mary Poppins, and yeah, there was no good time to release that movie then. And the thing is, it's like no one wanted to see the origin of Han Solo. No one wanted to see any of that. It's like, and then they had Lord and Miller on, and they fired Lord and Miller. Then they brought in Ron Howard to finish the movie, and it's like, well, I wanted to see the Lord and Miller version because that would have been fun to watch. And that was there was no good point in production on that movie for them press wise. And when we get to Rise of Skywalker, people are already upset, and they've been marinating in their hatred, stewing in their hatred of The Last Jedi for now 2 years. By the time we get to this movie, and I'm gonna come out and say it. The Last Jedi, the Rise of Skywalker, I don't think is bowing to the chuds on the internet. I don't think it's them saying, you know what, we were wrong. We're gonna do what we want. We're gonna reduce Rose Tico. We're gonna do that. I think that the decisions that were made to retroactively go back were what would have happened if J.J. Abrams did episodes 8 and 9 as well as episode 7, instead of doing what Disney did, which was episode 7 by J.J., episode 8 by Rian Johnson, episode 9 originally by Colin Trevorrow, and then ending up with J.J. Abrams. J.J. Abrams had an idea for how he would end the trilogy, but he had a lot of groundwork to lay to get to that point. And that's how we ended up with what we did for The Rise of Skywalker. It's not malice. It's not like they were like, oh, crap, we pissed off the fans. Let's go back and do what they want now. It was more of, we need to, what's it called? We need to lay a lot of groundwork to get to where this director's vision of ending the movie is. Because I think a movie where they end up with, where it's like we have Supreme Leader Kylo, and that would have been, you could have done a redemption of Supreme Leader Kylo without bringing the Emperor and do the battle on Coruscant like what Colin Trevorrow wanted. Have him lose the Star Wars, as he said awfully in the fucking script. Which is an actual line, by the way, when Hux kills himself in Trevorrow's script. He said, it literally says, he has lost the Star Wars. And I was just like, that is the single worst line I've ever seen put to paper, but it's just so funny. But then they're able to say like, oh, and now they backtracked and they did that, but we're not coming back. We're not changing it now. And now we got this. We have Kenobi's coming out. We have Cassian Andor. We have The Mandalorian. We have Fallen Order. And it's kind of like, that's why it all felt like it was all a response, where it's like, we're going to bow to the worst of the worst in the fan community. But it's like, no, you don't really have to. Because if you expand out in a way that's meaningful to people who haven't seen it, and you try to extend the hand to someone new, you don't have to worry about losing them. Because there's such a small faction of the fan base, based on the fact that The Rise of Skywalker did almost $2 billion. Without China. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, a lot of decisions that went into these movies, I didn't quite agree with in the sequels. But the thing is, and what people don't really understand, and I talk about this a lot on Beware of Spoilers, where it's like, what would I have done if I were writing this movie? If I wrote Joker, I would not have done the anarchist Joker, the Joker who's downtrodden by society, who feels like committing murder and being an anarchist is a good response to, being functionally an incel. I wouldn't have done that story. I would have done the Clown Prince of Crime, the gangster Joker, Cesar Romero kind of Joker, the one who he's a gangster, but his shtick is that he likes to, he's a failed comedian. There's a story to be told there. A failed comedian who ends up turning to crime to make ends meet. Substantially better story than the one we got in Joker. But I can't rate Joker for the movie I would have made. I can only rate Joker for the movie that was made. And how did that decision track with what we saw before? And how does it track in here? And again, I see a lot of people directing hatred at Rian Johnson for the decisions made in The Last Jedi. He was just working with what was given to him because he did not write The Force Awakens. And that's something else that everyone keeps harping on. It's like, oh, well, Luke was in exile and Rian Johnson put Luke into exile. Rian Johnson did not put Luke into exile. That was not Rian Johnson who did that. You can say Rian Johnson created Admiral Holdo. You can incorrectly say that Admiral Holdo was wrong to do what he did in the movie to Poe. You can say all of that. It's factually incorrect to say so, but it's also factually incorrect to say that Rian Johnson was the one who put Luke into exile. Because that's how the entire plot of The Force Awakens is trying to figure out where Luke exiled himself to so that way they could take on the First Order. And really, as a follow-up to The Force Awakens, it works very well based on where he was left. And then because he didn't create exactly the movie that JJ wanted going into Episode 9, we had to redo the entire thing and retread the whole thing. That's why I recommended back when The Force Awakens and when The Last Jedi came out, I said The Last Jedi should have been considered part 2 of Episode 7. Episode 7 Part 1, Episode 7 Part 2. Then do Episode 8, Episode 9. You could have done it perfectly fine then. And that's why JJ even wanted to do Episode 9 as a 2-part movie, because he wanted to be able to redo Episode 8 the way he wanted to. And quite honestly, if I'm Kathleen Kennedy and I'm hearing this, I should have been like, well, we got to find another director then. We got to find a way to end this in one movie. And it's obvious that you can't do that. You have a very one-track mind. This is what you want to do to end your movie, to end your series. But it's like there's so much that was poorly implemented about this because it was not planned out from the beginning. And they're going to say they planned it out from the beginning, but I listened to Iger's book. It did not sound like they planned it out from the beginning by any stretch of the imagination. We'll wrap up there for today. Next week we're going to do, I think I wrote it down somewhere, what we're doing next week. I think I tweeted it, but my phone is dead right now. Next week's movie is, I don't remember. I will tweet it out though. If you go on Twitter, at 30minreview, we are doing a giveaway. If you retweet and follow the account by midnight tonight Eastern Time, you get entered for a drawing to win a digital copy of Superman Red Sun. An outstanding DC animated movie. I love the animated DC movies, so we'll be giving that away if you do that. And if you want to support the show, I have 2 books coming out early next week. Where is my list of links that I have in the Word document? Here we go. We have The Muses coming out on April 28th. And if you go to tiny.cc/The Muses, you can pre-order it. If you go to tiny.cc/OPDNDU, you can pre-order Our Past Does Not Define Us. That's coming out on the 27th. And if you want to read any of the previous books, go to tiny.cc/Swansong, SWANSONG, and you can pick up Swansong for the first book before The Muses, which comes out on the 28th, Tuesday of next week. So until next week, which we'll be back with another movie. I'll tweet out which one we're doing. But until then, have a great rest of your week.